This podcast is brought to you by Tri-County Speaks, serving survivors of sexual assault in Berkeley, Charleston, and Dorchester counties.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ariana Keels, and I'm the Charleston County Victim Advocate here at Tri-County Speaks, based out of Charleston, Dorchester, and Berkeley County. Today, I have with me...
Okay, yeah, I got it. So my name is Bradley. I'm the Prevention Education Coordinator for Tri-County Speaks.
Thanks, Bradley, for coming to talk to us. So today, we're going to talk about sexual assault. What does that mean? How is it defined? And then we're going to do a little bit of myth debunking and talk about some common statistics. So Brad, will you start us off and tell us what's the legal definition for sexual assault?
Yeah, absolutely. So the definition I have is from SCAG.gov. So if you feel like looking it up, we encourage that. So sexual assault is technically known as sexual battery through the criminal justice system. And they define it as sexual intercourse, anal intercourse, cunnilingus, fellatio, or any intrusion, however slight, of any part of a person's body or of any object into the genital or anal openings of another person's body. So the only exception is when such intrusion is used for medically recognized purposes. So when we talk about sexual battery and our definition, so our agency's definition of sexual violence, it includes the legal definition, but more. So what I mean by that is we don't investigate, we don't define what sexual violence means for an individual. We encourage them to decide what happened for themselves. So there's no forcing a definition. We just provide support regardless of what they said happened. So if someone reaches out to us, we believe them. There is absolutely no reason for us to give them our opinions, what we think sexual assault is. We just support them unconditionally.
Nice. Can you give so I guess a good example of that would be someone calls on our 24-hour hotline and says, "Hi, Bradley. I was hanging out with one of my friends, touched me in a way that I didn't like," for example.
Yeah, exactly. Someone calls, they could say, this interaction happened and it made me feel uncomfortable, but I don't necessarily know that it was assault. That's fine. We will provide them with the definition. And if that's how they recognize it, then that's how they recognize it. But if they just kind of want to problem solve a situation, we're happy to do that too.
Nice. I think the next thing I really want to talk about are some myths. So on our website, tricountyspeaks.org, we do post a few myths and statistics. While these are not all inclusive, because statistics are everywhere, there are a lot of them, we did want to bring up a couple. So the number one myth that is listed on our website, and I think that should be listed everywhere, is that sexual assault only affects women. Not true. Not true.
Oh, yes, infuriating actually.
And so the truth is that sexual assault does not discriminate based on gender, sexuality, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, or religion. So it affects everybody. It's one of those horrible intersectionalities that crosses races. And we provide support at Tri-County Speaks for all survivors.
Yeah, exactly. And also, we all know someone who's been affected by this issue. And when I know someone who has been assaulted or is a victim/survivor of sexual violence, it affects me. It affects everybody. It doesn't matter if you have personally had an experience with it. Once you hear about someone who's impacted by it, you're impacted going forward for the rest of your life. Because likely that person is someone that you care about, and they're going to be unpacking this trauma and healing from it in the best way that they can. And that is life changing. We are all affected by it. It is not a woman's issue. It's a societal issue.
Exactly. The next one I have is a tough one. And I say tough because whenever you think about sexual assault, thinking about police reporting, you hear that phrase, the he said, she said. We need to eliminate that from our vocabulary. That's my personal take on it. But the idea behind this myth is that, or the thought anyway, is most rape accusations are false.
Not true, not true at all. It is a complete myth.
Yep, and the stat I have related to that one is that studies show that about 2% of rape accusations are false. It's about the same rate for any other crime. So if a person, a survivor or a victim, comes to you, always believe them first. Just knowing the work that we do and all that goes into reporting a crime of sexual assault, I just can't imagine that anybody would go through all of that because it's invasive. Having that procedure done, rape kits, safe, whatever you want to call it, it's invasive. And I don't think anybody would go through that if all of it was a lie.
People do not lie about crimes or bad things that happen to them. And if they do, it's very rare. Even when you look at studies about, false reports, and I said that in quotations for those of you who are listening, false reporting is just not something that happens when people investigate what it actually means. They're unfounded, meaning that, that false report of less than 2% could include police decided not to go forward with a case, there wasn't enough evidence, a victim or survivor recanted. There's so many other little descriptions that are included in that false reporting. And yet we hear people constantly bring up, oh, well, they could be lying about a situation. No, and you're taking away so much focus that should be on the fact that this is still an issue, regardless of how you feel about this particular, instance. It's happening. It's a huge issue. And every single time that we bring up a survivor coming forward and someone claims that it could be a false report, once again, you are just making it easier for people to continue to perpetuate sexual violence.
Another one that comes up, another myth, is that some of them, when I'm reading them, I'm just like, some things are just really ingrained in like society, and some things that we think about when it comes to like modesty and whatever that really is defined as, because that's super subjective, in my personal opinion. But one kind of goes towards that modest thought of if someone's wearing a tight dress, drinking a lot, or flirting, that they're quote unquote asking for it.
That is just so much to unpack. That is so much to unpack.
And of course, the truth is that no one deserves to be raped. It's never the victim's fault. And the perpetrator, also known as the rapist or person that's assaulting another person, is the one that should be held accountable and not the victim. No matter what you were wearing, no matter how much you were drinking or flirting, no one's asking to be assaulted. No one's asking to be raped.
Yes, 100%. And when you look at cases of childhood sexual abuse, elder abuse, we know that we're just creating this narrative about, oh, well, you were wearing something scandalous to continue to shame women who are in their 20s or young teens into hypersexualizing them. This is not the case. It doesn't matter what you were wearing. It doesn't matter, your gender identity. People decide to exert power and control over others. And this myth, which is so common, what were they wearing? It is so outdated and it never needs to be used ever again because it does not matter. You could be naked, you could be wearing a bathing suit, you could be wearing whatever people define as sexually provocative, and it does not mean that you were more likely to experience sexual violence.
Exactly. So another myth that we have, while we did previously state that not only women are affected by sexual assault, men are affected as well, we have another myth around men, and the myth is that men rape because they can't control themselves. And so I want to edit that to be people rape because they can't control themselves. And that's just not true. It's not true. As Bradley mentioned before, sexual assault is about power and control, not sex. And everyone has the ability to respect other people's boundaries. Maybe there's sexual things in nature, but if you're asserting your power or control over that person, whether it's an employer-employee situation, blackmailing or using coercive techniques, that's power that you're using to control the action of another person.
Yes, absolutely. Any form of violence is 100% a choice. You're making a choice to negatively harm someone or impact their life, and it's never okay.
The last one, this really should have been the first one. I mean, as I'm going through my list, I'm like, but I wanted to end off strong with these myths. So the myth is sexual assault is a private subject and we should mind our own business.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
So if we stay silent, we choose the side of the oppressor. If you see something or hear something, say something. And I think a large part of that is why we're here, why we're doing the work we're doing at Tri-County Speaks, is because our voice has power. When a survivor or a victim come to us and tell us that something happened, we're here to support them, accompany them to, get that forensic exam done, accompany them to the police, accompany them to court, to support them, because when they stand up for themselves and say this happened, we should believe them.
Absolutely. And the only thing I would add to that is a survivor can choose whether or not to, share their experience, and that's totally fine. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that if you're in a group of friends and someone makes a joke about sexual assault or, makes a claim that is, perpetuated by rape culture, call it out. I can't even tell you how many friends, I haven't seen them in a while, but when I do, when I share information that I've learned through my work, about statistics, about perpetrators, and they hear these things, I can see the change. All of a sudden, they're not talking about the fact about, that out of every 1,000 sexual assaults, 995 perpetrators will walk free. When you hear that number, it is alarming. It changes the way that you go about things. And when you realize how prevalent it is, you're more likely next time that you hear something to intervene. And that's just going to keep getting passed on to the people you care about and friends. And that's the only way that we can truly eradicate this issue in our society.
Like Bradley said, say something, call it out, call people out.
Absolutely.
While sexual assault is a very personal thing, it shouldn't be a private topic. While we don't necessarily need to talk about someone's specific experience, we should talk about types of experiences. Sexual assault is something that's completely preventable if we talk about consent, having healthy relationships, and respecting the boundaries of others. There's no reason why sexual assault should exist. Because if someone's saying yes enthusiastically, that means yes. If they say no or they're not saying yes enthusiastically, that means no. Have these conversations so that one, you can prevent sexual assault, and two, if it's occurring, you can get the person the help they need.
Snaps all around. You said it perfectly.
So want to transition. We talked about a little bit about statistics, but Brad, did you have any specific ones you wanted to share with the listeners and viewers?
Absolutely. And we, in our role, get to see these statistics all the time. So I really picked ones that, even though I know them and I see them all the time, they're still just as alarming. And I pulled my statistics from RAINN.org, which is the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. Please check them out. They update their statistics annually, and I think that they only share information that's within 5 years. So very accurate. So the first one, which is definitely very common, you've probably heard it before, once again, still as alarming. Every 73 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. So that means about, on average, 433,648 victims, 12 or older, are raped or sexually assaulted every year. Wow.
And it's just like what we've been talking for about between 5 and 10 minutes. So between 5 and 10 people have been assaulted in some way since we started talking.
That is so many. That is such a huge number. Like, I don't know about you, but sometimes I catch myself when we have a moment in the day where I'm just, existing. And I think, wow, in this moment, somebody's being impacted by this. That is way too many. Why are we not talking about it more? Why are we not doing more? That number is never easy to hear. So another statistic is that Native Americans are at the greatest risk of sexual violence. So Ariana brought up earlier, the intersection of our identities and how when we talk about marginalized communities, they're at a greater risk. So when you think about Native Americans being at the greatest risk, what does that mean to you, Ariana?
It means that a person that's Black or brown is at a higher risk of being assaulted than a person that's not Black or brown.
Yeah.
And it's alarming. And I mean, I feel like even thinking about that, when we're talking about sexual assault in general, that ties into, human trafficking as well, in the numbers we see with those minority communities that are affected.
Yeah, absolutely. Indigenous women are often not talked about in media. So when you hear the statistic, for me, it was like, why are we not having a spotlight on this situation? Why is it getting pushed to the sides of our community? So for listeners who are doing the work, if you're a part of a grassroots organization, whether you're, just taking on an issue solely, think about the missing voices that are there and really pay attention to who's being affected most by the issue you're talking about. For us, I know that we constantly try to readjust our mission and kind of our current focus. And this is absolutely one of them. How can you bring Indigenous voices into the work that you're trying to do? So I have one more statistic, which is about 70% of rape or sexual assault victims experience moderate to severe distress. This is a larger percent than any other crime. So that is a really high number. 70% of victims or survivors are, experiencing PTSD, drug and alcohol abuse, just flashbacks, anxiety, depression, and that is way more significant than any other crime. That's an important thing to think about. Do you have any comments on that statistic?
I just feel like I feel like flashbacks of crimes always come up for our listeners, and I think sexual assault is a super triggering thing for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I would encourage everyone to go look at that particular statistic and look at the rates of increased substance abuse, the things we were talking about, because those numbers are extremely high as well. And to me, that means that all of these things cost a lot of money, right? Mental health services, rehabilitation centers, trying to keep crime off the streets. Stuff like that costs a lot as a society. So shouldn't we be putting more focus on not only just eradicating sexual violence, but also helping people who are post-violence, who are, going through the healing process?
Yeah, I know that here in, the Charleston Tri-County area, we have MUSC and the National Crime Victim Centers right, at MUSC in the downtown area of Charleston Peninsula. But there are a lot of communities, especially in our state and across the country in more rural areas, that don't have access to a lot of those, mental health services just for regular day-to-day folks. So just imagine needing those services because you were sexually assaulted and they're not readily accessible. It's an issue, and that's why we say this affects, the public, because just because you weren't necessarily sexually assaulted, if your partner or your friend was assaulted, it affects you. There's, that domino effect that can occur because, when people walk into your lives, they affect you in a different way. Just like sexual assault, when it comes into your life, it affects everyone around you, not just you.
100%, absolutely. And for anybody who watched or listened today, you're taking the first step, or maybe this is like the fifth step into helping not just us, but survivors and victims solve this issue by being informed and educated about statistics and myths and how you can dismantle these things is really important for us to truly make a change. So thank you all for just showing up.
Yes, thank you all for coming, listening to Brad and I talk about the work that we do, debunking some of those myths, bringing up some important statistics. And if you'd like to learn more, you can follow us on Facebook, like us on Facebook, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, or check out our website, tricountyspeaks.org. We do have a 24-hour crisis hotline. That information will be linked below. Thank you guys so much for your time today, and we hope you'll join us back here for more information coming up soon.
Thanks.